Hey friend, in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to get better at watercolor fast. So on this channel, if you've come here, you've been gobbling up my videos for the past few years, then you've maybe or maybe not seen my 2-hour long free workshop on watercolor called The Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. There's also a free 40-page downloadable item that comes alongside it. We'll link to it in this video too. Well, that video is 2 hours, and I understand that your time is precious, and some people like to pause and come back to that video. So we have that 2-hour long video, which is great for the people who want that deep dive, but I thought I would kind of compact that and make it into a shorter bite-sized video for those of you who just need to learn how to get better at watercolor fast. And we're gonna be focusing on the 4 main techniques of watercolor today. The first one is wet and wet. Second is wet and dry. Then we have glazing and color lifting. Before we move on and dive into the video, make sure you check out the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook. Like I said, it's free, and I'll just send it over to you via your email. It has a breakdown of all the supplies I use and why. So if you're wandering the aisles of some art supply store, and you're like, what paper do I buy? What paints should I buy? What brushes should I buy? Goes through all the pros and cons, what to look for, all that kind of stuff, and also the main techniques in color theory, composition, etc. But let's focus on wet and wet first, and we're going to be doing what's called a value scale, because one of the most important parts that I see a lot of people in the beginning struggle with when it comes to asking questions about, is this enough pigment? Is this enough water? Is this too much water? Why is this hard line happening? So it's all about water control. And when we practice wet and wet painting, like if you do a value scale or you do some sort of wash, or even a bubble painting where you're letting things bleed together, it is the most helpful, quickest, and easiest way to improve wet and wet technique with your painting. So I've got a size 10 round brush. Again, if you are very, very new to watercolor, make sure you check out that free ebook, because if you're like, I don't even know what my brushes are or what to use, it's all broken down in there for you. And I'm just gonna load up with a color, and my color that I'm choosing is Prussian blue. So I'm loading up this brush with Prussian blue, and every, I don't know, 4 seconds or so, I'm going back to my water and I'm doing a little hummingbird sip of water. I'm not dunking it in the water. I'm just doing a sip, because I already loaded my brush up with water fully, and all I need is just a little sip of water so that I can get more of this dried Prussian blue on my brush. Because if I'm going at this Prussian blue and trying to get it thicker, trying to get it more opaque, but my brush is dry, I'm actually not picking anything up. So I need to just do a little tiny slurp and then go back to my dish of paint, whatever pigment it is that I'm working with, and grab more. So that just makes sure that it's still got a consistent slurping up of paint, and it's not drying out the brush too much, which we're just not going for dry brush texture right now. We're going for wet and wet. So we want to make sure that our brush is nice and wet and glazed with water, so that we can actually have a thick amount of paint, but then also working with wet watercolor still, not too dry. So wet and wet technique, I'm going to start with the darkest value or the deepest value. When I talk about value, I'm talking about the light and darkness of a color. So once again, if you want the deep dive info stuff, download the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook and watch the 2-hour breakdown workshop here on my channel. I'm not going to slow down and cover all these things, because again, it's in the deep dive video. But a value scale is when I start with my thickest, darkest color, or vice versa. You can start with your lightest value. So that's a nice thick amount of Prussian blue. It looks like a midnight blue. And then I just start to remove the water from my brush. So I'm flicking that pigment off of my brush into the water cup and swiping off the excess. And then I'm gonna do what's called the pulling technique with wet and wet. So this is wet and wet painting. Wet and wet painting is when you're working with a wet swatch or wet section of color with another wet section of color or water or whatever. So in order to get this nice smooth gradient between dark and light, I'm just going right up against that edge, that bottom edge, and pulling it down with that basically just water on my brush. And as you can see, the dark is starting to bleed into the light. I can even wash off my brush even more, making sure that I'm swiping off the excess water a couple of times on my jar, because if I have too much water, then we're gonna create puddles. Whenever there's a puddle of water on my paper, that's when you get hard lines, because the pigment starts to whoop, fall to the edges of that puddle because it's a slope, and it collects at the edge of the puddle, and that's what creates those hard lines. So you want to be mindful of that too. You don't want too much water on your brush. If you're covering a smaller area, you don't want too much water on your brush. So just like a thin glaze of water. Sometimes I'll go to my paper towel too and just like allow it to soak up. So as you can see, that dark blue is fading into the light blue. You can even lift your paper and let it kind of run down even more. But we have a nice smooth gradient between dark to light. Make sure if you're trying this out at home, look at how your color is landing. Does it look like blocks of color that are super separate from each other, or does it look like a nice smooth blend between dark, midtones, and lights? Because that's what we want to work on. We want to work on refining our smooth blends between our colors, between our values, because that's where the magic of Wet n Wet comes from. It has that nice smooth gradient blended look. Wet on dry is the opposite of that, obviously. It's when you're working with something that's your layer is dry first and then you layer on top of it. And either it kind of combines glazing where you layer on top, but wet and dry is obviously going to be different than wet and wet. So let's practice a little bit more wet and wet first though before we move on. So another fun practice for wet and wet technique, which once again, we do deep dives of this in the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor workshop video. But another fun practice is just playing with circles. So I've got, my brush was loaded up with Prussian blue, and this is a round brush, and I'm painting a circle. If you need help with painting your circles, they're looking wonky or you don't really understand, I'll link to a video where I break this down as well. And then to really grasp how wet and wet works, I'm gonna move on to a different color. You can move on to a different color or a different value. I'm gonna grab fresh, clean water because I'm gonna grab a pink color, and I don't want any blue on that to make it purple, so I'm gonna do just the clean water. And I start further away from where I want it to bleed first, so I don't touch the blue circle yet. This is quinacridone red, and then I just barely kiss the edge of that blue circle. And you'll see that pink is bursting into the blue. And the more contrast you have between your colors, like light and dark, or blue's opposite is orange, the more contrast there is, the more obvious the bleed will be. So keep that in mind. If you have all the same like dark blues and blue greens and all kind of the same value and hue range right next to each other, then you won't be able to notice the bleeds as much. So I like to put lights and darks next to each other, or contrasting colors like blue and orange, or even pink and orange because they're further away from each other on the color wheel. But then having some together where it's similar in hue, a nice empty just water circle, and doing that little, glaze right next to the circles where it can bleed is also fun. So this is wet and wet technique. One of the main techniques of watercolor that you have to learn to master. If you focus on doing bubble paintings or value scales every day, even for a couple of weeks, you're gonna see massive improvements in your watercolor and your abilities to do shade with watercolor and blend and color mix. It's a really, really crucial, essential step in mastering watercolor. So always come back to your wet and wet technique. And then the next one that we'll do is wet on dry. I'm gonna do a couple of just simple blocks of color in really light values. So I have a great video on my channel called the Tea to Butter exercise, where the tea to butter exercise is a really helpful watercolor exercise that will help you with consistency, your paint and water ratio. So make sure you check that out. But basically what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do really thin, transparent, that's a little too empty, just squares as my base layer. And then once these dry, I'm gonna layer on top of them. And anytime I see like a little puddle forming, I soak it up with a dry brush. Just little things like that can make all the difference. Like even up here where this circle is kind of forming a puddle right there, paying attention to that kind of stuff and making sure to clean it up or kind of pat it dry before it dries will help you avoid hard lines. So I've got my light blue square. I'll do a lightish burnt orange square. The colors don't matter right now. We're just teaching the technique of wet and dry. So we'll do like 3 more of these squares, maybe a bright limey chartreusey green with lemon yellow deep and some sap green. We'll thin it out so that it's just a nice glazy glaze. Oop. And maybe a thinned out pink. And the brush that I'm using is a 3/4 inch wash brush from the Aqua Elite series by Princeton. If you're looking for some good watercolor brushes, I love the Heritage 4050 series, but the Aqua Elite series from Princeton is specifically made for watercolor, and it holds really nice amount of water and pigment. And it's my preferred brush for like doing big area of coverage, like big washes, landscape paintings with big backgrounds and stuff like that. Okay, one more color. We'll do a little phthalo turquoise. Sitch. Lighten that. And now we're just gonna wait for these puppies to dry, because in order to do wet on dry technique, we need our layer to dry. And that brings me to one of my other just side note tips. Patience, Iago. Patience. A lot of people like to hurry through their paintings. I don't know why we're in such a rush all the time, you know? Patience, wait for things to dry, add depth, add layering once your layers are all dry. I'm guilty of this as well. I like to be done with things and I like to finish it all in one sitting, and I don't want to take breaks. I don't want to come back to it tomorrow. I want it to be done today. But we need to challenge ourselves sometimes, and watercolor's really good at doing that for us. Thank you, watercolor, for all your help. So anyways, first tip or technique to focus on to get better at watercolor fast is wet on wet. Exclamation point! Wet on wet sounds exactly like what it is. It's when you use 2 areas of wetness together and they blend and create smooth edges. Wet on dry is also exactly how it sounds. Revolutionary. The first layer is dry and then you layer on top of it. This is how you create layers in your paintings, like realistic flowers, which, by the way, while this is drying, I just recently released, not recently, at the time of this video being published, but I just recently released a detailed 2-hour-long peony workshop, and it's only $9, which is basically less than the cost of 2 lattes. At a nice barista place. So check out that workshop. It's got the breakdown of how to sketch a flower from basic shapes, how to see it and sketch it and understand the basic shapes. And then the second half of the workshop is me teaching you how to paint it layer by layer, wet on wet first and then wet on dry layers for more detail. So now this is somewhat dry, especially on this side. So we'll work slowly. We're showing our patience in real time. And I'm gonna take my size 6 round brush, if I can find it, and I'm gonna paint actually my size 2. And you know those, when you paint like a triangle in a darker color on one side, it looks like it's like inverted almost, or like 3-dimensional. We're gonna do that, it's so fun. So I'm gonna take probably like a milky consistency, which again, this is covered in detail in my tea to butter exercise video and in the complete beginner's guide to watercolor video. So check that out. But I'm basically taking a milky consistency of my Prussian blue. So it's not too thick where it's like cream or butter spreading on toast, and it's not too thin that I see through it like this transparent blue. And I'm gonna go from one corner to the other with my size 2 brush. And we are adding a layer on top. Wet on dry, folks. So this technique is how you add more detail, add more depth to your paintings. Understanding when to use wet on dry technique, when to use wet on wet technique, and all of that is going to be covered in the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook and also the workshop, and also my Everyday Watercolor Companion course, which is available on my website, goes even more in depth because, you know, we got to help out at every stage of the way, you know. We'll do the same thing for this guy, but in a different color, because you can use wet on dry with the same value like we did with these blues, or you can do it with a different hue, same value, and it will still have some contrast because it's a different color. So we have like a tea-ish, milky-ish, tea-ish, coffee-ish consistency. This won't make any sense until you've watched my tea to butter exercise video, by the way. But tea is the lightest transparency picture spilling tea on paper. It's more transparent than coffee is darker. Milk is thicker. Cream is even thicker, especially a heavy cream, and then butter, really thick. So that was the briefest rundown, but go watch the video if you need to. So I'm gonna do the same value as this swatch, this burnt-y, like umbery, not burnt-y, umbery, burnt orange swatch, but I'm gonna do a different color. Maybe let's do contrasting colors. So another blue, but in a coffee consistency like this base layer is, but it will show up now because it's an opposing color. We'll be able to see through it though, because we're doing one of those lighter, more transparent values. So it's gonna create basically a glazing effect, which is another foundational technique of watercolor. So we've got wet and wet, wet on dry, and glazing. So this is considered wet on dry, but also glazing. If you want to glaze or shift a color of something that's underneath, or you want to just add and brighten something and you just do a thin glaze like someone in ceramics would do or whatever. It's just a thin, more transparent washiness over an area that you want to change. So because there's an undertone underneath this blue is some orange. Orange and blue are contrasting colors, so it's going to take out the blue and make it more murky or more muddy or more muted because of the orange underneath. So glazing is a fun technique to just explore what happens if I have pink underneath this color, or what happens if I do an underpainting of orange under my landscape and then I add greens and browns and all the things to it. What would happen to my colors? It will probably mute them if you do a contrasting color, or brighten them if you do something else. So fun things to explore there. All right, and then for this one, we can do just a slightly different hue. We have this limey green. Let's do a turquoise on top, or you could do a pink on top, or you could do explore. The world is literally your oyster with watercolor. So who says you can't try whatever pops in your mind? It might not look the greatest, but also sometimes the things that you think will turn out the most hideous actually surprise you. And you're like, wait a minute, I really like that color combination. I'm gonna try that out for my landscape paintings next time, or whatever. So we've got a buzzsaw. So we've got a fun turquoise on top of our limey chartreuse color. I can lift color if I want to, which is the fourth and final technique we're covering in today's quickie little lesson. Lifting color. You can lift color with a dry brush, clean this brush off, dry it off, blah, 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 bleep, bloop, blah. and then you can soak up, or lift is what it's called, color. This brush is tiny, so it will take you literally forever to lift all of this color if that's what you're doing. Or you could use a paper towel, a Q-tip, you know, anything to soak up and lift paper. This is a great way to erase watercolor. It's also a great way to add texture to something. If you wanted like the print of your paper towel all scrunched up, you could do that. Sometimes I like to lift some of the color if I don't like how dark it turned out, and then I'll just grab a clean, slightly damp brush, and not too wet, because then the water is going to add to it and burst and create hard lines and cauliflowers. I'm going to take this brush and then blend that back in for a nice cohesive look to the phthalo turquoise. We're getting a spam call. I feel it buzzing. That's that, guys. If you are just wanting to brush up on the 4 main techniques and you want to get better at watercolor fast, this is the best way to do it. Practice your wet and wet, practice your wet and dry. I love practicing wet on dry with these fun little patterns. You could also make little tile patterns in these instead of just the triangles. We have a nice orangey red on top of the pink wash. The orangey red is in a thicker consistency, so we have that light and dark contrast where, oopsie, we just went to the wrong color, but that's okay. But we are sticking to a more analogous color palette with these two. Pink and red are very similar in hue, and an analogous color palette means that you use neighboring on the color wheel colors together. It's a more peaceful transition for the eyeballs. I do deep dives in the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook and workshop. Check it out. What should my last color be? Rochelle? Purple. So confident. Yes, let's do purple.
Purple.
It feels very Barney, but you know, we're 90s kids. Why is my purple brown? I guess this is why people clean their palettes. I do get a lot of people really don't like how messy and dirty my palette is, and I totally understand. I really do.
It's your type B.
It is my type B. I like it. I do, however, think I'm gonna clean it soon. It's a big deal for me. It is daring. So we've got this like smoky purple on a bluish, cobalty-ish, turquoisey-ish. And I'm doing a thinner consistency, so a glaze with the purple so that you can see the green underneath, which is going to create an even more muted effect to the purple because of the slight contrast. There's yellow and green. Yellow and purple are contrasting colors. So nice. A few different approaches to wet on dry, and a couple of them are glazing. Whenever you just have that thin, washy over top, that's a glaze. We did some lifting. We practiced our wet and wet, which is going to give us those nice blends and bleeds and gradients. So practice these 4 techniques, and I promise you over time, you will get better at watercolor fast. A lot of people like to focus on the next tutorial or the next step-by-step flower painting, and that will definitely help. But if you're wanting to just brush up on techniques and get better at watercolor fast, then this is for you. This is where it's at. Make sure you download the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook. Check out the deep dive 2-hour workshop here on my channel, and also Everyday Watercolor Companion course will even take it a few steps further. So thank you as always for watching these videos, and I'll see you in the next one.